I was doing the research on the topic based out of my interest, and because I was in an academic setting, I was needing to research. So I did, and what I found was that I had insufficient information despite what I considered a very thorough search through archives, interviewing various informants. It's a very clinical term, informants, but yeah, there wasn't very much out there. And what I began to realize was that after 10 years, if this was going to result in any kind of product per se, that it would have to take a different slant. So I produced this under what I viewed as a literary history. Or another term that I've come across later on was an archival history. And in those senses, other researchers, writers like Slotkin and Ives, they talk about those things as that from the archives, what you can gain are traces of a history that might be shown from different perspectives. In that sense, then you can produce lives, get an insight into what lives were lived at that period of time. Because as we know, or I hope we know, the archives are not free of bias. Who contributes to the archives, whose materials are stored in the archives, those do not belong to other subjugated groups. It was just a reinforcement of certain European perspectives, of in particular ones where, like Chinese, and because I was researching Chinese and Indigenous relationships, they were recorded in the archives as a result of court records where people were being held in jail or something for alcohol sales or gambling or crimes, but things that might have been celebrated, they weren't there. And so it became the question as, you know, did Chinese people, Indigenous people, do anything of significance? And what means significance? And obviously they weren't significant because they weren't in the archives as such. Indigenous people and Chinese people did have relationships and they were welcomed in. And perhaps that's why they aren't recorded, because they also had relationships of harmony. Whereas with European settlers, their relationships were one of discord and conflict. And of course, those were recorded. During the gold rush, I think that there is ample evidence in the archives to the extent that both Chinese and Indigenous people were used. And they were used for the purpose of the European miners. I was doing my writing. I wasn't looking for things that have already previously been recorded, but it might have provided a backdrop to the story. But I was looking for something else, something that hadn't been told yet, and how that might contribute to a better understanding of the relationships that they had. The ones that existed between British, European settlers were always ones of conflict. And so were there any other kinds of relationships? And at the same time, there were other peoples present. There were the Blacks, there were the Mexicans, there were the Hawaiians in this province. So what were their relationships? They're absent. You know, there's like a mention in history that they were there and this is what they did. You know, the Mexicans made good stevedores on the mule trains used to pack supplies in and out. And what else? There is no what else, you know, there's nothing there. The Hawaiians were here and now they, you know, there's a history of them on Salt Spring Island as far as that goes. And But did these groups intermix? I mean, people traveled. What happened? They came face to face with each other. What happened? Nothing? Or
on a human level.
On a human level, yeah. And so we do know there are a lot of intermarriages, and you could track down some of the descendants of these intermarriages, but they're really reticent to share any information, or they have no information of what that was like. So one of the perspectives is that these people don't want to inform or can't inform about their past because they don't deem it as a history. You know, it was there and it has no significance. But to the fabric of British Columbia history, it does have a meaning, a significance.